Owen, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking the time.
Miriam, it's a pleasure. Delighted to be here.
Yes, and I'm excited to learn about Agile HR and the facilitation practice around it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about it.
So maybe you can give us a little bit of background. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator, and are you actually still calling yourself a facilitator?
I started considering myself a facilitator probably around 10 years ago. So my most of my career was spent in global marketing. And what I found was at a certain point in the mid-2000s, I was doing less and less operational work and more work with local teams, with teams in market. And in particular, in the late kind of 2000s, 2009, 10, 11, I spent a lot of time working with teams in South America. And what I found there was that often they had the technical skills in marketing, but actually they needed facilitation skills in workshops to actually get clarity. And I started doing that, first of all, with trained facilitators alongside them, or with insights or research teams who were very good at that. And then I started doing it on my own. And I think by the time I left that company, which was around 2012, 2011, I realized that I could do that. And that thing had a name, and it was facilitation.
Nice.
And that was part of my offer. And I continued doing that on and off in future roles and then I guess formally I probably started calling myself a facilitator around 2016, which was when I was in a formal learning role, and also I started running workshops. There were some career workshops and also delivering a marketing academy, and then I was the facilitator. So.
And from marketing, I know that you moved into HR, and I would be so curious to hear from you, what would be the difference being in a workshop or training marketing versus HR people about facilitation?
It's an interesting one, and I'm sure like you and many of your listeners, I'm always careful to generalize because everyone's experience is different. And what I would say is, what I can talk about confidently is the difference between being in a workshop with marketing folk and being in a workshop with talent and learning and development, or OD people. Because I think HR has two reasonably distinct sides. And I certainly know that when I'm with a bunch of people from, say, reward or operations, they are different in terms of their approach often than whereas, say, talent and L&D people are. So I'll talk about that second bunch because I have more expertise there. So what I found when I was in workshops, either facilitating or even just participating with L&D and talent people, is generally they're pretty open to it. So they usually drink their own medicine, and they understand the rules. They usually participate. They get it generally. So they if they're there, they really want to be all in. I think there's a general. One of the things I noticed when I moved into L&D particularly is there's a general openness and a willingness to help people who have moved in. Like I said, they generally take their own medicine. Marketing is a less open function. Marketing is structured and rewarded around kind of maintaining your own ideas. Unless you're especially client side, if you're in an agency, you're always looking for opportunities, you're selling, etc. And some of the agent client guys are brilliant about connecting. Client marketing guys are less so. They're less external facing. And I think that is changing. But obviously I've been out of the function formally for 5 years at least. But I think they're less open. So typically egos can come into play more. There's not all marketing people, but a lot of them. My experience is that there can be, I think I know better, and therefore you have to have that discussion with them and win them over a little more.
So what would be your strategy? And I don't want to go too much into the marketing direction, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
How would you get them then to open up and to get more of the sharing culture?
There's an element,
at least in the workshop space.
Yeah, and there's an element of design, and there's an element of in the moment, right? So design-wise, one of the key things we did, and it's interesting because we've talked about this before, is the idea of make sure the leaders are part of it. So what we always did in the academy was we always did the leaders workshop first, and then we said, you will deliver alongside me as a facilitator.
That's brilliant.
Yes, because
so they became your co-facilitators.
They became the co-facilitator, and that is critical because what you have to do is, and I think it's a general principle I work on, is you're basically infiltrating a tribe, right? You're trying to get into a bunch of people, and if you turn up cold, you have to break down their defenses, and that takes time and energy, and that time and energy is precious workshop time wasted.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can find shortcuts into their tribe, then you can get the stimulus and the change happening much quicker.
And you get so much of this change process right from the beginning. So you have the leading by example from the leaders. They get to practice their facilitation skills that they just acquired.
Yeah.
And can thereby also inspire the others.
Yes.
And
exactly.
they are then intrinsically also motivated to keep this practice and to...
Absolutely. Because also we talked about behavioral psychology. The idea of we try to, there's lots of research showing that we want to be consistent to our previous actions.
Yes.
And if you stood up and said, I believe in this new way of doing marketing, harder for you to roll back, right? So, but like you said, I think it's also really positive things. They learned how to facilitate in a controlled and supported environment. Yeah. Because they can do as little as as much as they want. Because even if it's a day long and they only do an hour, they're still doing an hour. And also, even just the fact that they stand up at the beginning and say, I believe in this, is a very strong signal.
And by making them co-facilitators, they are kind of forced into the listening role and to hold the space. So they will less participate and put their ideas upon the group and rather step back and see new ideas emerge.
Yeah, it gives them the space. You're right, actually. I hadn't thought of that. It actually gives them that distance to look at both the dynamics and also how the content is landing and where their teams are struggling. And because interesting, I had many conversations afterwards with the leaders, and they would be saying, and I would actually say, wow, that marketing manager you have on that brand, they're really creative. They've got really good ideas, and they might be like, yeah, I knew they were good at X, but I hadn't seen that side to them, and that's great for them because they're getting like you said, a different view of their teams rather than just a classic operational. They deliver X, they deliver Y.
Yeah, and when the leaders participate, you often run into the leadership bias, where the leader speaks first and then everyone just agrees.
Yeah.
Or the leader feels the obligation that they have to speak most.
Yeah, and the expectation.
And they're so used to it.
That's
so if
it.
you take this away from them, they might even be grateful that they don't have to actively participate.
Yeah, I think so. I think it depends on where they are in terms of ego, I think partially.
True.
Some would be and some wouldn't be,
Yeah, after your workshop with them, they might.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's always, exactly. I think that's an important part of the difference of the leader design as well, is it's as much about getting them to consider, to start viewing how they're going to be part of this culture change in their part of the business.
Beautiful. And did you realize the sneaky way how we went from marketing to HR, and now we're perfectly in the topic?
No, I didn't see it coming. So it was very sneaky. Nice work.
I must admit that I didn't
like
even
it.
plan.
Stealth.
I would love to say that I strategically planned it, but I didn't.
Emergent.
Exactly. So we're now right in the middle of the topic of cultural change through behavioral change.
Yeah.
Which are HR practices, basically. And your flagship is Agile HR.
Yeah.
And maybe you can just help me and the audience understand, first of all, what does Agile HR mean?
There's a lot of different labels around this right now. So you'll hear about like agile people, disrupting HR, Agile HR. And I say we because I'm part of a community founded by two brilliant women, Natal Dank and Rena Hellstrom. We are very clear on what it is, as in we have said there is a specific mindset around Agile that has frameworks and tools and practices under things like Scrum, and we'll talk about that more. We are saying, okay, take that mindset and those tools and apply it directly to HR. So it isn't a broader thing. So for example, Agile People, which is brilliant as well, they have a broader ambition. Theirs is around, for example, bringing diversity and inclusion into. We think that's great, but that's not our thing. Our thing is about saying, we've seen how Agile operates in software, and we think there's a lot of really good things you can bring straight over to HR. So it's very practical, and it's very specific in terms of how we do it.
And it's, to me at least,
which they are, what those tools and things are, if you want. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Just one thought, because you said that it's not so much about inclusion and diversity, but I think that the topics of inclusion and diversity are HR topics by definition. So you can really focus on the method and the techniques of HR, of Agile as a tool, basically.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think that's the great thing, is that it actually is very, what really attracted me to Agile in the beginning, and still does, is that it actually, I think it takes fundamental human psychology and behavioral, and it works in a way that is congruent and takes advantage of those things rather than against. So I think that's my big.
Can you give us an example?
So teams, right? Agile is team based. You know, because again, I'm assuming we can talk about what Agile is, etc. later on if you want, but I'll give you some examples. So Agile is team based, and Agile is particularly they work with teams of generally no more than 8. So 5 to 8 is the optimum. Now, why is that? That's because that's the amount of connections we can easily keep track of. So again, loads of good research on this. You'll know it really well. But basically, if you go to 10 or 12, you have exponentially far more connections to keep track of, and it's much harder to. Whereas if I'm working tightly with a team of 5 or 8 people, I can get to know them really well, and I can intuitively know how they operate. And whereas if you push that up to say 15 or 20, I'll lose track. It'll be, I will have to have formal mechanisms to keep in contact or keep track.
Yeah.
So it's that's one example. What else? That we work, I think we are, I'm going to put myself out there a little bit and say, I think as humans, I think our nature is kind of, we are a bit like interval training. I think we work better in chunks of time like that with intensity, where you're like, and that's what in Scrum, that's what a sprint is. Now, of course, you have to have that recovery period too, right?
I was about to ask about that. Yeah,
because if you do back-to-back sprints, that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah.
But I think that's another Agile, because I think normal traditional business operates at a certain pace all the time. And that is also a recipe for kind of boredom and burnout. I think we like that. Or bore out, exactly.
Sometimes it's worse, yeah.
Yes, I've never heard the term, but I like it.
I worked in the public sector before.
Yeah. That's it. And I think we do like routine, but also we need to have a degree of variety, because that keeps us I think it keeps us energized. And so that'll be another example. Yeah.
So what is the aspect of HR, of Agile, that got you into this Agile HR environment, and how do you apply it?
I think being concrete about it, I actually started because I knew the head of learning development at Sky in the UK, and they had switched over all of their L&D development into Agile, and it was relatively recent, and they had a lot of learnings, and I just went to see her because I thought it was interesting. I'd heard about Agile. A friend of mine is a CTO for a company, and we talked a lot about it, but I hadn't seen it applied to HR. I'd heard what Tracy was doing. I went to see her, and then a few months later, she actually wanted some marketing expertise on a sprint. And again, that's the nice thing about the sprint kind of framework or structure, is that it's a good container. You can bring in experts very easily. Because and also particularly because Sky work, they do almost all of theirs remotely. So I never actually saw the team, even though I was in one part of London and some of them were in another part of London. It was because there were other people in Scotland and elsewhere. We did it all over virtually. And so I basically did some marketing coaching for them because the challenge they had in particular was as much of a marketing challenge as a learning challenge. They were trying to get more people using. They knew they had really good materials and they knew the people who used them really liked them. But they were like, how do we get them out there to other people in the business? Because they don't seem to realize that's a marketing challenge. So that's why they liked, I was like, oh, we can bring in this marketing guy who also gets learning. Yeah. Great. That got me into it.
And I can perfectly see the benefits of bringing Agile into the L&D world, because if we learn in sprints, we get this sense of meaningful progress. So we have this sprint of learning, and then we see how it improves our lives and way of working. It's tangible, as you say.
That's exactly, and that's one of the things I really like about sprints as well, is that actually it's, because it's quite time bound. Exactly, you get something at the end. It's physical in some ways. You can physically manifest it, and then you can show it to other people, and you can go out there and you've built a little bit of momentum. That's all it takes, and it might be a few months even before you do another one, etc. But it's there. And whenever people say, where do we start with Agile? I'm just saying, just 8 people, cross-functional, a problem that you have not been able to solve. The thing that has been doing the rounds for a few years, and it's political or it's painful or it's that give me the thing that when people's, when you mention it, their ears droop and their hearts sink. And then give me an enthused bunch of people who care about the topic, even if they haven't got any expertise in it.
Would you mind if we get very specific?
No.
So, for instance,
not at all.
And we talked about that topic before. New bonus system. So a company wants to get rid of their bonus system.
Yeah.
Extremely political, extremely painful, extremely emotional.
Yeah.
How would you start such a project? How would you design it in terms of a sprint? And how would you use the tool of a workshop for it? Yeah.
So what role does the workshop play in that design? So any topic like that, I would. You have to get a broad definition of what the problem is, but actually that changes a little bit anyway as you get into the sprint. So it's more an area. It's more saying this is this area and these things are out of bounds or within scope.
Okay, we're designing the bonus system.
For example, and again, I think there's a thing around saying, okay, well, these are the behaviors. Here's the problem we're having with this system. Okay. These are the this is here is where it doesn't align with our behaviors. Here's the kind of behaviors it's driving. It almost at that point doesn't have to be too much more than that.
Okay.
Yeah, because then the next stage is the team, and then it's about saying like I said, it's a cross-functional team. I prefer cross-market as well. If you can get across a bunch of countries, I find I think general cognitive diversity, it makes for better workshops, so, and better sprints. So I think you want that. And also for me, I'm also always thinking about the solution and how it's going to get implemented. And if you've got a bunch of people across functions, across levels, across countries,
get the network effect.
You get the network effect, exactly. They're going to go back to wherever and go, well, I'm also thinking from an agile movement perspective, they're going to go back and say, I was part of this great sprint and we did X and Y. So it's spreading the message further.
They become change agents,
agents, always champions and advocates. And again, I'm always thinking about how can I support them afterwards for them to spread the message. So we do that. Then you get the team, I get them on a phone call. I check with their enthusiasm levels. I just check in case there's impediments, or what's holding you back. And again, you're trying to get that transparency, openness early on. Look, some people will say, I'm really under pressure. Okay, but you can make the workshop, that's fine, you'll be there. Okay, how can we help you? Is there anybody else who can work with you? So always looking to see, how do we make this as easy as we can for these people? Facilitate it. and then the next thing, and this is a really critical bit, is the say, okay, we talk about the problem and what it means to them, and then I say, okay, go away and interview 5 people. And I don't do formal lists I say, here's some guide questions to guide it, but I do a little bit of interview training. And the interview training is basically saying, it is, you need to let the conversation go where it goes. You, again, it's a bit like a facilitator, you are not in control of what this person says. All you are doing is nudging and guiding it in the direction. But the most important thing is that they open up and they talk frankly and honestly about this problem. And you want to get to the emotion level. You want to actually get to say, why is this causing you a problem? Why is it a pain point? And not just that it's kind of, oh, well, it's a bit inconvenient. No. Then we shouldn't be doing a sprint on it. It takes a lot of people and time. No, exactly. There should there should be I'm worried about this. Okay, why is it worried? What are the implications if we don't get this right? And you're not looking for solutions in that interview. You're just trying to really understand. You're really trying to dig around the individual, their identity, and the problems it's caused. And where is it? Again, specifics. Where is this manifesting? Oh my God, I can't get. We did with a company with a talent, future talent, and they were like, Eastern Europe. They operate. A client of mine operates mainly in Eastern Europe, and it's currently full employment in many countries. Lots of big American and European countries have put their back office there in these countries. And you've got like a lot of tech startups. So what was a very attractive company is now people are like, well, if I don't work for you, I'll go and work for whoever. So they were saying, how do we reshape our future, our talent development, our recruitment and development? And so you're getting into different people have different views of why it's a painful point for them.
And you create empathy inside the organization by just nudging them to listen to their colleagues and to understand their points of view, perspectives, without judging, without putting them into a direction, without controlling.
That's and the big thing, the big plus, I think, I don't have any scientific proof for this, but my experience is that then when people come into this, we might have a phone call with a bit of downloading as well and interviewing afterwards. But then when they land in the workshop, they've left all their other stuff behind because they've interviewed 5 people, and they're not thinking about it from their own perspective anymore. They're thinking about it from a user perspective, and that's the big plus. So, and also, we typically have about 50 interviews, and that's plenty. Because the themes emerge. Yeah. It doesn't have to be.
You'll see the pattern.
Yeah, you see the pattern, exactly.
So how would you then, I like the term downloading.
We call it the interview download. Yeah.
How would you do that or facilitate that then in the workshop? How do you use all this data and still make them count with their individual perspective as well? Because
you want to incorporate that too. I think the individual perspective comes through anyway in the next couple of days, because you're working with them and you're checking, and they feel strongly about it. So usually it doesn't get subsumed. It comes out in the prototype development and those elements. So it's rare. I've never come across a group that's been so user focused that they wouldn't express their own views so far. And that's actually a really good point, how to do the download, because I'm still finding the right way. I've worked with clients where we did it, where a group did it beforehand. So a separate group or a segment of those sprinters would actually work on it themselves and then produce a summary. I'm not convinced that's the best way. I think it's about, and again, the reason I'm kind of pausing on this is because the last sprint we did, last one I did in November, it took a while to get the interview download. It was very rich, but it was, I think it probably took a little more time than I would have liked. And that when we did the feedback at the end of the workshop, they said the same. So I think it's about getting the people who have done the interviews to do some kind of summary work up front, but it doesn't have to be really formal. So it's probably just bullet points around themes, and then for them to explain it in like in a time bound way, like 10 or 15 minutes, so it doesn't just feel like because the risk is it can be the same thing coming out, and if you've got 8 people doing that, you can lose the energy.
15 minutes, then so it's most of them will check out.
But I'm still experimenting with that.
And from the process, it reminds me a lot of the design thinking process. So would you, and I can imagine that
the front end of Agile is design thinking.
Okay.
Basically.
Okay. Yeah. So that makes sense.
Agile is basically, they've collected all these things from different people, and they're very open about that. So it's design thinking, it's lean, it's the original Toyota production system. It's all those things combined. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Take the best of all and put it into a new box.
Yeah, it's a new wrapper.
Would you then let them design personas?
Yes, absolutely. That's the first step.
Okay, so you take all the 50 kind of interviews, and then what are the kind of stereotypes? Yeah. Or extreme users that we can define
extreme
from
users,
them.
exactly. Yeah. And for me, it's also about, is this representative? You know, because I typically wouldn't want to have you wouldn't want to be taking more than 3 or 4 forward. You might do some more just for reference. Yeah. And it's about understanding what their place is in the system. So it's very much the systems thinking approach of saying, okay, well, there's this person, but actually they're not really a user, but they are critical in terms of the system. You know, so not typically someone senior, right? Won't be the user, but they need to feel okay with it. Yeah. You know, so.
And you said that you would do this over a couple of days, this workshop. Would this mean that most of the sprint would happen remotely, and then the team comes together for the final part of the sprint?
No, the sprint is actually mainly, it can be done remotely, but I think that will also depend on the level of team. You know, there needs to be lots of psychological safety and trust within the team if you're going to do it remotely. So the Sky guys were brilliant, but they'd all work together. So I was the only foreign element. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So this means that the sprint then happens literally in the workshop room through...
Yep, 3 to 5 days. I do mine in 3 days usually. So basically we do our interview, download, personas, maybe some experience mapping, and there'll be a little bit of agile coaching in terms of explaining what it is and those things. Day 1. Day 2, typically it carries on into some more experience mapping and maybe some getting into ideas and solutions, and we'll do some ideas prioritization, and then towards the end of that day you're actually getting into prototype building, and then you do your showcase, which is presenting it to everybody on the last day.
And then how do you make sure... So what is the result, and how do you maintain the momentum?
Afterwards?
Yeah.
Yes, and the challenge there is, I think, based on what clients and people I've worked with have told me, is that the thing I bring that others might not is that I'm not a dyed in the wool. I've been working for, Agile has been, the Agile Manifesto is 2001. And whereas I've only been working in this way for, say, 3 years. But I think that's also why the kind of clients I work with are companies who are brand new to Agile, who like the idea but don't know where to start. And I think because I too am not a native speaker, because it's learned, it's a bit like a digital native, isn't it? I'm not an Agile native. I think that's I think that's easier for them because they can see, I appreciate their world, and I know what it's like to kind of go between those two worlds. I guess that's probably why they would want to work with Agile, why they want to work with me.
And related to that, I would like to come back to something that you just said, that you would put some Agile coaching in between. And I wonder what the difference is in your understanding between agile coaching and agile training. So I imagine you're in the group and they don't know anything about agile, but they've done the interviews, now they're downloading, and then how do they differentiate whether it's a coaching or a training in terms of agile?
Yeah. On the simple level is I do two things. So I have two offers in Agile HR. So one is everything we've just talked about, running a sprint, and that's basically taking people who know nothing about it and getting an outcome like that. And the focus there is actually producing a solution to whatever problem the business has or has given us. And while they do learn a lot, that is not the primary focus, you know. There's also an Agile HR certification we run, which is a formal training for 2 days, and it's run like a sprint, and there is pre-work, there is also post-work, and an actual like an online test and a project, etc., as part of it. So that's more formal training. But I think to get into the more, I think you're also asking more generally, where is that line? I think about it as a training has a degree of content. So it'll be me talking about a specific thing around Agile that I know about, that I've spent time understanding, and my focus will be actually about communicating that content. Now, where it gets a bit more blurred is that I don't believe that it's ever, when I think this, you know, there's still an idea in education and teaching is that, well, if I explain something really well, then you get it, and then we're done. And I don't think it's ever like that. I think it's always
it's
really
a beautiful dream.
Yeah, exactly. I think the idea of knowledge transfer just feels very. It isn't. It's never as transactional as that.
Download, upload.
Yeah,
done.
exactly. No, we're not. You know, that's where the analogy falls down.
Yeah.
You know, and I think I'm still seeing it very much as going, I'm just putting some stimulus out there. The people there engage with it. I suppose my gauge of success is, are they getting it sufficiently in that moment? Because this is really, so the Agile HR training, they need to actually go away and apply it to a project outside. When I'm doing the training, a little element of coaching or training in the sprint, it's, do they get it enough to go and do the thing I want them to do? So if you know, are they stuck on the fact that they don't get why Agile is, why would you want to work in this way? Well, then I'll have to spend some more time to get them over it. But if they're like, a lot of the time, because there's been enthusiasm built up, they're like, yeah, just let us at it. And I'm very much of the way that they need to have just enough knowledge to be able to give it a go. Because I'm always encouraging to say, they're like, oh, we don't know how to do a persona. I was like, well, do you remember we talked about that guy? Yeah. Okay, well, how would you describe him? Well, he's this, that. Okay, go. And I'll come back to you in 10 minutes, you know, but just because a lot of the time in the sprint, people are slightly uncomfortable. It definitely has a sprint element. They're kind of, they're out of breath. And they're like, are we doing the right thing? I'm like, sufficiently, yes. You know, enough that we can come back to it.
Yeah.
That's it. It's always just, you know, it's like I said, it's a prototype. Everything is a prototype.
Yeah. So if you have a person, HR person that comes out of an Agile HR training, how would they operate differently on a daily basis than just a normal, stereotypical HR person? Or,
I think they'd be looking at the problem differently, and I think they'd be thinking about solutions differently. I think would be the kind of on the most visible way. So instead of a traditional HR person might be looking at their leadership program and going, okay, right, we need to design a new leadership program. Therefore, I need to get a very detailed brief together, and I need to put this tender out to a number of leadership companies, and I should probably get some input into that brief from a few key people. and I'll set up. I know. So I'll contact these leadership companies, and I'll set up the tender, and maybe I have a few more people in that brief as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas an agile HR person would be going, there's something wrong with how. So I've seen specific behaviors, or someone's told me about behaviors, or there's some kind of symptom saying our leaders aren't. It's breaking down somewhere. I need to find out more about that. I need insight, I need data, I need to get richness around that kind of problem. Maybe I'll do a little bit of snooping around myself first, and I'll talk to a few people, and then maybe I'll actually go and get a team together to tackle it. But the start point is, I don't really know what that problem is. I just know it's kind of wrong, because you're assuming, how can I know?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas only the users will really know. I need to go and talk to them. That's the thing. And it isn't, and the users are the people experiencing the problem. Mm-hmm. They are not the fact that my HR director has said, we need a new leadership program.
When do you think is this mindset shift happening in your sprint working with the HR people? Is it already when they're going on the ground interviewing their peers, or is it on the download, or is it the final day on the debrief?
I don't know is the first answer. I certainly see signs of it in the interviews. Mm-hmm. After, not everybody, you might have, like I said, 8 or 10 people. But I certainly I hear it in their voices when they're talking. They've talked to users and they're going, there's lots of, I never thought of that. Lots of kind of aha, insightful moments, etc. So I think continually, especially in those first couple of days, and it's funny, it's not actually thinking about it. It's not that last day. It's not the showcase. Mm-hmm. That's just the end result.
The cherry.
That's just the cherry. Absolutely. What is it? That famous Muhammad Ali quote? Long before the. I'm gonna butcher it, but it's long before the lights and the ring and the fight itself. Mm-hmm. The fight is won. It's won on those long days running in the gym and training, etc. And it's kind of like that. That's just the last bit. Yeah. People come along and see the showcase and go, it's amazing, and actually they haven't seen all the other stuff that's kind of built up towards it. Yeah. Long before I dance under the lights. That's what he says. Yes.
Nice one. Drinking break. We cut that out.
Very good.
Thank you, Gordon. He's helping me with editing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So during your multi-day workshops, what is your favorite exercise?
I think it is probably the actual experience mapping. Mm-hmm. I think that's the bit I really like. It's the bit I carried over from my marketing days into this as well. Because a lot of these, I think it's probably why as well, partially, I found Agile appealing and straightforward beyond just the psychology, because a lot of the tools are marketing tools. Mm-hmm. And like I said, I know originally design thinking. Yeah. And I was familiar with, one of the things I used to really enjoy in marketing was really getting under someone's skin, both in terms of when explaining it, but the thing I probably really used to, and I still miss, if I'm honest, is you would go to a new country and you would go out into the place and you would get under the psychology of what made so why does someone drink beer in this country? What are they looking for? And some themes are common and some themes are different, to other countries and other places. And I think experience mapping is still a little bit of that, because the persona is part of it, but I think the actual experience when you're going through what they're thinking, doing, feeling at any point around this is when it becomes very real. It becomes very, so they say they're frustrated, and it's at this point here when they can't recruit that person because it takes so long. I can see, God, because also you can also see, wow, and if we sorted this for them, how much better would it be?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that creates a lot of energy for me and for the team. You know, you really see why.
And I can
Brings out the
also
why.
see that you can facilitate this process in different ways, where you really get your participants to become excited, whereas they fill in a template.
Yeah.
So what is your approach to that? For instance, if one of the listeners has never done that before, what would be your advice for such an experience mapping?
So so I say to them, first of all, put yourself in that person's shoes. Think about it, and think about all the things you've just learned from the interview, etc. So there's a kind of like the mind shift first. And then I say, okay, start with the thinking or doing. I like to start with doing because it's very concrete. And I say, talk me through the steps they will take and put them on a Post-it. We'll pick one color of Post-it and put a line of Post-its. Typically I prefer them horizontally. I think it works better versus vertically. I've seen it vertically. And I'll say, get the same color, so it's usually smaller teams, say 2 or 3 people. And I'm saying, put that and say, write down very clearly just a couple of words of that step. So it could be write brief. It could be check in with stakeholders. It could be, so if this was, like a recruitment, it would be contact HR or their contact recruitment, job spec, might be an upload, whatever. And also if there's any gaps in there, like 2 weeks or whatever, how long it takes. So you're really getting a map of it. And then with a different color Post-it, say, okay, what are they thinking around that, above it or below? And that's a different color. So you have 3 lines from left to right, say, of Post-its going. So thinking, oh God, I've got to cover this role while that person leaves, or oh my God, we'll never get anybody. Last time this took forever, or hey, actually that person was okay, but I'm looking forward to recruiting someone. And then feeling is really important. That are they feeling apprehensive, excited, overloaded? And that's critical, because that is the mindset that they're going to bring whatever. So and I think this is the richness in terms of design, whatever your solution, your prototype needs to be, it doesn't take place in an emotional vacuum. It takes, you have to be, if someone is stressed, you have to make it really easy for them. Whereas if they're excited, you have to, you leverage that excitement.
So it's basically the line of Post-its talking about emotions that will then drive the new way of doing. Yeah.
Well, I think you need all 3. Because you're mapping the system
within
as
the
it
process,
is.
Yeah.
You need all 3, but it will absolutely be critical to the prototype design.
So the feeling will define the new way of doing and then be translated into the new process.
But you might actually create something totally different. But you're knowing where they're coming from. You have a from and a to. Right? And that's why it's very good for learning as well. If you do that exercise for learners, you're going, where are they? It's kind of my point. It's never in a vacuum. You're okay. That's where they are. So we talked earlier about a group, you said, who came into your workshop and they were, why are we here? Right. You knew you were ready for that, and you did activities and exercises to change them into a state that was more receptive.
And actually what was funny is I used an exercise that I learned from Mireille on episode 30. So because I learned before that they were forced into the workshop, so I invited them to stand in a different corner, and I asked them, okay, who believes that being in this workshop is a reward? Stand in this corner. Who believes this is a punishment? Stand in the other corner. And by that I gave them permission, not wanting to be there, and we had the opportunity to discuss it. And it totally changed the atmosphere in the room, because they felt heard, and it was okay that they were critical. And I said, okay, give me 1 hour. And if you want to leave after the hour, then you're free to leave. So they all came back after lunch on time. So that was my win.
They came back, and they came back on time. But that's a really good way of doing it. It's interesting, because one of my other favorite exercises, I don't use it as much in Agile, but I would have in other workshops, is I really like physically moving people about. And I think it's lovely because you gave them a chance to express their dissent
Yeah.
without getting into a shouting match or etc. because they were able to do it physically.
Yeah. And
You know?
also by seeing that you're not alone with your emotions, then usually this already calms it down.
Yeah, legitimizes
so
it.
I would make the first move and stand in the punishment corner. Okay, I perceive this as a punishment. Who's with me?
I did something bad in a former life. Yeah, I agree. It's nothing like legitimizing it like that.
And then they don't feel alone, and that sorts most of the problem.
Yeah.
Just from an instinctive behavior kind of point
Yeah.
of view, if we see that we're not alone with our opinion, our anger,
Yeah.
usually this calms us down already.
Yeah. But even also, I think it's also critical that you gave them an escape, because you said just an hour.
Yeah.
And no hard feelings if you want to
Yeah.
leave.
And nobody left, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I often think that if the notion of having an escape route means we don't have to use it.
Yeah.
You know.
So talking about escaping, for you, and I like to ask the question, what makes a workshop fail? So what would be a workshop where people just want to leave? What's for you a characteristic of a bad workshop?
Interesting. What is it? Why would they not want to be there? Why would they want to leave? I think your point about being heard, you know, it's really, I think a bit like a meeting is if you feel like, well, no matter what I say in here, it makes no difference. No one really cares. It wouldn't change anything. I think that would be like a, you know, a workshop it can be a lot of energy and time. And I think why would someone want to stay if what they did in there or said in there just made no difference? You know, that would just feel like a waste of time. You know, I think that's, and then I think the other one is just the physical of it, the physical element. I think it's still surprisingly overlooked in many places how if you don't have the right physical space, it just impacts hugely. Now, I think you can work around it partially. My one of the first sprints I did was we got stuck in a really tiny room for 3 days, no windows, and we made it work. But there was an agreement that it would have been easier if we'd had a better room. I'll put it that way. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
You made a comment earlier about would you invite someone to your house and not offer them some food or drink, you know?
Yeah,
and I think it's kind of like that. You just have to make it welcoming, you know?
Yeah, the example was for a meeting, would you invite people for dinner and expect them to bring their own food?
That was it. Thank you. Yes, exactly.
To do the work for you.
Yeah.
Although I can also imagine that if it's not planned and you end up in a room that is very challenging, like too small without windows, this can also bring the group together because they're in this challenge together. So it can bring forth, I imagine, some playfulness.
Yeah, it does. And also it kind of, because you're all kind of carping about it together and saying, but it does. And I think also it brings out resourcefulness. And actually there's another, in fact, maybe you might want to talk to him at some point. There's a guy called Matt Barnaby who I know from some meetups, and he said one of his most interesting experiences was he didn't have any room at all. They had mess up the room booking and nothing. So he was in the office of this local authority in England, and the only place they could really find was a corridor. So he ended up running a workshop in a corridor. That's and awesome. They put up all their prototypes and things on the walls. And the plus side was people were going by and going, oh, that's not right, because it was a process thing. And he was like, okay, well, what should it be like? So they got immediate feedback. Yeah.
Hashtag transparency.
Definitely. Because
and inclusiveness.
Yeah. And certainly there are companies who do that, who purposely put up, when it's a particularly a big, long, complicated process, they will purposely put up entire things on long walls and invite people to come and put Post-its or write on their bits. In fact, I was actually just this morning, I was listening to the former Ford CEO, Alan McLally, I think his name, he used to work in Boeing, and this was previous times in Boeing. And when they were designing the 777, which is, phenomenally complicated piece of hardware, they had a brilliant 3D modeling system that anyone could look at. And then so anyone knew that if they made a change, that they could see the impact, everyone else could see the impact of a change they had made and say, hang on, but if you put that there, you compromise this, or, so I think it's the same principle for me. It's just about how do you make the system as transparent as it can be, you know?
And how much thought you actually put into it. Because to come back to the workshop space, I think if you would deliberately book a small room without windows, then it's a lack of care, and it will surely negatively impact the workshop and the atmosphere. But if you end up in the room and you're generally surprised and you communicate it in such a way to the participants, then you can turn it into something positive because you're literally sitting in the same boat. Or
It's not like exactly. Whereas if you communicate that this is okay, this is normal, and I like to operate in small crappy rooms because it really, people get really hot and.
We didn't invest more budget.
Exactly.
In this workshop.
Yeah. Whereas if it's kind of, exactly. Yeah. I also, it's a bit of the thing about Agile as well, actually, is that Agile and Scrum are actually quite structured, and there are certain versions or certain approaches in Scrum particularly where it's really literally, there's a famous book by Jake Knapp, who's a ex-Google Ventures guy, and in that you can do a 5-day sprint where every single hour is prescribed, so you can do that. So then the reason I'm saying that is because people sometimes think that Agile is just kind of doing what you want, and just sort of making it up as you go along, and it isn't. It's very adaptive.
Workshop anarchy.
Yes, exactly. And it's an excuse for poor planning, but it's not. But the reason I was saying that is because it is adaptive, and that's quite nice. And people often will, as it changes, as the workshop itself changes, and we have to do different things and say, hang on, we were going to bring those experts in there, but they're not available. Oh, okay, well, maybe we need to go and see them over in the office across the road. That the adaptive kind of culture around Agile, people usually, they're not like, someone hasn't organized this properly. What's this about? They just go, oh, well, we adapt.
Solution focus.
Solution focus, very much so.
And then as soon as there's a bug in the system, you just go and fix it. And work around it. Yeah,
you try and fix it yourself, and if you can't, you find someone else who can help you fix it, and if you can't, you go and talk to the Scrum Master, and he or she removes the impediment. Yeah.
Nice.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Since we're approaching the end of our hour, is there anything that you can think of that we haven't discussed yet?
The only thing I can think of for the moment is how much your listeners know about Agile itself. But I think there are plenty of people out there talking about it, and you can put links in show notes and things like that. I can give you some video links as well.
So maybe I would have one final question that I wrote down. And it's just out of curiosity. Thinking about the term agile facilitation, what would that mean to you? Maybe it exists. I haven't heard it yet.
Maybe it does as well, and I have no idea. Agile coaching is very established, but I've never heard anyone formally saying agile facilitation. And I was thinking, what would the difference be between a facilitator versus an agile facilitator? I don't think there'd be a huge difference between a good facilitator, especially an experienced one, and an agile one. I think the difference I would pull out would be that in a workshop, there's usually a goal, there's usually an objective, but actually getting there is almost less important than the process sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It depends, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's much more, we need to actually come up with a marketing plan, that's why we're all in the workshop. But sometimes it's more, this team isn't working. How do we pull all those things out? And you don't quite know where that end point is.
So it's more about the outcomes than about the outputs.
And I think certainly sprints and Agile is it comes out of project management. It's a project management. It's a way of getting things done.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore there is and certainly the way I work it, and there are different ways of doing Agile. There's not just Scrum, there's Kanban and different ones, but it is still generally focused on a concrete outcome. And therefore that makes from a facilitation perspective, it's about facilitating getting the work done. And of course, you're never trampling over people, etc. You're always giving them their an opportunity to speak. But so for example, when I'm doing Agile facilitation, if we call it that versus normal, I might let conversations run more in another one.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in an Agile facilitation, I'm thinking, my mind is always on that goal. And then I'm just thinking, if I would only let conversations run if it's going to contribute something to the end goal or the prototype, or if I feel like this must be said, because if it isn't, it will affect the team dynamic or this individual or etc. But the more but I don't know if that's it's a really it'd be a lovely debate to have with some experienced facilitators. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
Thank you. If someone were to if a listener fell asleep after minute 1, just woke up and doesn't have time to listen to the entire show again, what would you like this person to take away?
Yeah, I would actually say try it out. Agile is it's a way of working. It's experiential. It's not. You can listen to videos and you can read about it, but it really doesn't actually give you an awful lot. In my experience and talking to other people, the only way you can know it is to actually be part of it somehow. So, and how you do that, there's different ways of doing it, but I would encourage people to find a way to give it a try rather than intellectually try and appreciate it. It's a lived thing, I think, rather than, it's a bit like me explaining, say, oh, bike riding is great. Yeah. Whereas they'd be like, what, in the wet and around? How does that work? Whereas actually or skiing, when you have the experience of actually doing it, you're like, hang on, sliding down this mountain, slightly out of control, what? But it's great. Yeah. And I think Agile is a bit like that, actually. I think it needs to be experienced.
So, and it can be experienced even by HR.
Particularly by HR. Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much for this insightful conversation.
Miriam,
I learned a mountain full of things.
Great to hear. And me too. I've learned lots as well. It's been a pleasure.
Dum, 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 dum.
You never asked the hashtag question, but I assume that was